I think the book is about, it's about many things, and it's a really rich text. But one key meaning that sometimes is ignored or gets lost is how important relationships between men are. There's male friendships and male colleagues, and there are no women in the book at all, which I mean, well, there's a few very minor characters who are female, but basically it's all men going to clubs and meeting up in their houses at night. And so there's a wonderful sense of the kind of homosocial. Around the time that I was writing or working on this edition, I was teaching a class called Queer Victorians. And so I think the queer aspects of the book really came out for me, and especially London as a place where men cruised, Victorian London as a cruising place, and the mysteries of the city, the interaction of men and a kind of Gothic queer city were elements that struck me newly with this edition. A lot of people haven't actually read the book, and they think they know it because they know the story or they know something about the story. And there's this sort of popular saying of she's a Jekyll and Hyde character. So people think they know what that means, but when you actually read the book, not only is it much more psychologically complex than you might think, but also it's not one person but two people, right? So Jekyll splits into Jekyll splits into two bodies. We have Hyde, who is this working class, younger working class man, and then Jekyll is a wealthy doctor. And so there's a way that Jekyll kind of hides out, pun intended, in this working class body, like he puts on a bodily or embodied disguise in order to transgress. And I think this plays out in the geography of the novel as well. When I was writing the introduction, I at first thought, and I think a lot of readers think, that there's the lower class part of London and there's the upper class part of London, and those are the two, they're split. And the wealthy Dr. Jekyll lives in the wealthy part, and then the lower class Hyde lives in Soho, which is obviously working class with like gin palaces and immigrant women. But I think when you start to read the book more carefully, you see that the areas kind of come together and sort of are really clearly permeable, that characters pass in and out of them, that even Jekyll's area, which is supposed to be wealthy, it turns out is also kind of run down. So there's a really interesting sense of the city becoming kind of intertwined and haunted throughout in different ways, and becomes not so split by class. When editing this edition for Norton, it was really important for me to include some of his letters as well. Stevenson was a lovely letter writer, and it's so fun to read his letters. And he had this huge circle of male friends, and a lot of those friends were famous people in their own rights. There were painters and writers, and he was close to Henry James, for instance. And again, we see this sense of the homosocial. Like it's pretty clear that Stevenson himself was not gay or queer. He was married to a woman, and so, but he was kind of a queer ally, we might say. And it's pretty clear he also understood what his friends were up to in the sense of same-sex desire and same-sex sexuality. So yeah, I think in the letters there's just a wonderful sense of his love for men, his interest in men, his desire to delve into closeness and intimacies between men. Another thing we find in the letters is he talks about how quickly he wrote this novella, in his letters and in other texts that are, I think most of them are included in the edition. He writes, he says, "Oh, it came to me in a dream, and I finished writing it in a few weeks, or I finished writing it like in a day, but then I rewrote it over a couple of weeks." Right. So there's a sense that he had this weird dream, and then the book just kind of poured out of him, the story poured out of him. And that also seems kind of wonderful, especially if the reader who's reading this edition is a writer and struggles with writing things and they take a long time, And so it's kind of fun to see that someone could write something that has become such a classic so quickly. Editing an edition like this is incredibly fun and tons of work. But one thing I love about it is I feel that the student or the reader, if the reader is willing to read the whole thing, I would hope that the reader would, in some sense, feel like he or she took a class on this book, right? So it's like a seminar on Jekyll and Hyde within one book. So that's one thing I love about it. But I also feel that I myself as a reader like to experience a text without other opinions affecting me first. Like I like to experience a text kind of fresh with my own eyes. And so for this reason, I find myself as an editor being kind of minimal when it comes to things like annotations. Because when I want to read a classic book that I have maybe never read before, I will often skip the introduction and not read the annotations at first, and read the book first, and then go back and read the introduction. Annotations back matter, right? So it's kind of, I want to be aware of that when I do these sorts of editions, that I on the one hand, I want readers to experience this amazing tale fresh, so they can have their own, ideas and perceptions and about it. But then I also want to surround the text with other ideas that will give them a sense of the history and the context and the culture and the authors, who the author was, and critical interventions and all of that. Yeah. So I think with these editions, there needs to be, there to be a kind of balance between presenting the text newly and surrounding it with really helpful material. So yeah, editing these editions is really wonderful and interesting, and I hope that it's enriching for readers.